The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian floor, its crystalline walls reflecting the bioluminescent patterns of 1,000 different species. Ambassador Thexanar of the Crithian Empire stood at the central podium, his 4 eyes gleaming with barely concealed amusement as he addressed the assembly. The human delegation sat in their designated corner, a small group of 5 individuals who had been granted observer status just 3 cycles ago. Earth was still considered a backwater planet, barely worth the Council's attention. Thexanar's presentation hologram flickered to life, displaying images of creatures from various death worlds across the galaxy, massive predators with razor-sharp claws, venomous hunters that could dissolve prey in seconds, pack animals that moved with military precision. Each species had been catalogued, studied, and in some cases domesticated by the advanced civilizations of the Council. The Crithians prided themselves on being the galaxy's premier hunters, having conquered over 40 death worlds and documented their most dangerous inhabitants. And now, Thexanar announced, his translator converting his chittering clicks into standard galactic. We turn our attention to Earth, humanity's small blue world. Our preliminary scans have identified several predator species that humans claim to fear. The hologram shifted to show images of lions, bears, and great white sharks. Several council members made sounds that approximated laughter in their respective languages. These creatures are certainly formidable by primitive standards, but they pale in comparison to the true apex predators we have encountered across the stars. Dr. Sarah Chen, the head of Earth's delegation, felt her jaw tighten. She had expected some level of condescension from the older galactic civilizations, but Thexanar's dismissive tone was grating on every member of the human team. Her colleague, Dr. James Morrison, leaned over and whispered, "Should we say something?" Sarah shook her head slightly. They had been warned to observe proper diplomatic protocols. Earth needed the Council's technology and trade agreements. Making enemies on their first official presentation would be catastrophic for humanity's future among the stars. The Crithian ambassador continued his presentation, pulling up comparative data between Earth's predators and those from established death worlds. According to his analysis, a Terran lion would last approximately 47 seconds against a Vexorian ripjaw, a creature that resembled a 6-legged panther with electromagnetic pulse generation capabilities. A grizzly bear, he claimed, would be easily subdued by a juvenile Thoraxian crusher, despite the crusher being half the bear's size. The charts and graphs painted Earth's wildlife as quaint, almost adorable in their limitations. The humans have no true hunters among their ranks, Thexanar declared, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. Their so-called apex predators are merely large animals with basic hunting instincts. They have never faced a creature that truly embodies the spirit of relentless pursuit, of absolute fearlessness, of refusing to acknowledge defeat, even in the face of certain death. This is why humanity itself has developed so slowly. They have never been properly challenged by their own world. Sarah's hand moved to her tablet, her fingers hovering over the files she had prepared. She had known this moment might come. The Council had requested information about Earth's most dangerous predators, and she had compiled a comprehensive list. But she had also included something else, something she had debated bringing up at all. The other delegates had laughed when she suggested it. "They'll never take us seriously if we mention that thing," one had said. But now, watching Thexanar's smug presentation, Sarah made a decision. She stood up, her movement causing a ripple of attention through the chamber. It was unusual for observers to interrupt a formal presentation, but not explicitly forbidden. Thexanar paused, his 4 eyes focusing on the small human woman. "The observer from Earth wishes to speak?" he asked, his tone suggesting he found this mildly amusing rather than offensive. "With respect, Ambassador Thexanar," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the thousands of alien eyes now watching her. "I believe your analysis of Earth's predators may be incomplete. You have focused primarily on size, strength, and conventional hunting strategies, but you have overlooked what might be the most dangerous creature on our planet, not because of its physical superiority, but because of its psychological makeup." Murmurs rippled through the Council. Several species began rapid consultations with their advisors, pulling up their own databases on Earth's wildlife. Thexanar's expression, as much as Sarah could read it on his alien features, seemed to shift from amusement to curiosity. "Please," he said, gesturing to the central hologram projector. Enlighten us. What fearsome beast have we overlooked? Sarah activated her tablet and the hologram shifted. The image that appeared was not impressive at first glance. A creature roughly the size of a medium dog, with a stocky build, short legs, and a black and white coat. It looked almost comical compared to the massive predators that had been displayed earlier. A sound that might have been the galactic equivalent of snickering came from several delegations. This, Sarah said clearly, is Mellivora capensis, common name honey badger. Average weight 9 to 16 kilograms. Average length 60 to 70 centimeters. Native to Africa, Southwest Asia, and the Indian subcontinent. She paused, looking directly at Thexnar. And it is, pound for pound, the most fearless and relentless predator humanity has ever documented. The snickering grew louder. One delegate, a massive creature from a high-gravity world, made a comment in its native language that the translator rendered as, "The humans mock us with a pet-sized animal." But Sarah was not finished. She began playing a video compilation, footage gathered from wildlife researchers across decades. The first clip showed a honey badger approaching a pride of lions, the lions each outweighing the badger by more than a factor of 20 scattered. They did not fight, did not attempt to defend their kill. They simply ran. The chamber grew quieter. Sarah continued narrating as more footage played. A honey badger raiding a beehive, completely ignoring thousands of stinging insects that would drive away animals 10 times its size. Another badger hunting a cobra, one of Earth's most venomous snakes. The snake struck, its fangs clearly penetrating the badger's hide. The badger stumbled, appeared to lose consciousness. The video timestamp showed 2 hours passing. Then the badger woke up and finished eating the snake. Honey badgers have been documented attacking buffalo, young crocodiles, and even adult humans when provoked, Sarah explained. They possess a metabolic resistance to venom that allows them to survive bites that would kill most creatures our size within minutes. Their skin is so thick and loose that predators cannot grip them effectively. When threatened, they do not retreat. They attack. They have no concept of impossible odds. We have observed honey badgers driving leopards from their kills, stealing food from hyena packs, and defending their territory against animals that could kill them with a single blow. Thexnar's posture had changed. He was no longer lounging confidently at the podium, but standing straight, his attention fully focused on the hologram. "Surely this is exaggerated," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "These must be exceptional cases, anomalies." "Every honey badger exhibits this behavior," Sarah replied. "It is not learned. It is intrinsic to their nature. They are born with an absolute refusal to acknowledge that anything in their environment is superior to them. They will fight until they win or until they physically cannot continue. And if they cannot continue, they wait, recover, and resume the fight. We have a saying on Earth, honey badger doesn't care. It is both a joke and a statement of absolute fact." The council chamber was now completely silent. Sarah pulled up her final piece of evidence, a research paper from the Guinness Book of World Records. In 2002, this creature was officially recognized as the most fearless animal in our planet's documented history. Not the largest, not the strongest, the most fearless. And that, Ambassador Thexnar, is what makes it the perfect hunter, because it never stops, and never gives up, and it never ever backs down. 6 months after Sarah's presentation, the Galactic Council had mostly dismissed the honey badger discussion as an interesting but ultimately irrelevant curiosity. Earth remained on the periphery of galactic politics, and the major powers continued their usual games of influence and territorial expansion. The Crithian Empire, in particular, had moved forward with their plans to establish a hunting preserve on Nexus 7, a barely inhabited moon that they claimed would showcase the greatest predators from across known space. Thexnar had become obsessed with the honey badger presentation. He had reviewed the footage hundreds of times, consulted with xenobiologists, and even commissioned a discreet investigation into whether the videos had been manipulated. Every analysis came back confirming their authenticity. The creature was real, and its behavior was exactly as documented. This bothered him more than he cared to admit. In his culture, understanding one's prey was paramount to being a successful hunter. How had his people, with all their advanced scanning technology and database of millions of species, missed such a significant detail about Earth's wildlife? His second-in-command, Vexril, had a simpler explanation. "It is small, Commander. Our initial scans focused on creatures that posed physical threats to settlements or could be valuable for commercial hunting. A creature weighing less than 20 kilograms did not trigger any priority alerts. This made logical sense, but it did not satisfy Thexnar. There was something about the honey badger that resonated with him on a primal level. Something that his hunter's instincts recognized even if his conscious mind struggled to articulate it. Meanwhile, on Earth, Sarah Chen had been promoted to Director of Xenobiological Relations, a newly created position that reflected humanity's growing involvement with the Galactic Council. Her honey badger presentation had become something of a legend in diplomatic circles, often referenced in training materials as an example of how to turn a disadvantage into a strategic advantage. Humans were physically weaker than most spacefaring species, but Sarah had demonstrated that psychological factors could be just as important as physical ones. She received an encrypted communication one evening while working late in her Geneva office. The sender's credentials identified them as a junior researcher in the Crethean Diplomatic Corps, but the message itself was clearly from someone with access to high-level information. It read, "Director Chen, I write to you in an unofficial capacity. Ambassador Thexnar has been authorized to acquire a live specimen of Mellivora capensis for study and potential inclusion in the Nexus 7 preserve. I thought you should know. A human representative will be required to facilitate the capture and transport. Expect a formal request within the week." Sarah stared at the message for a long time. The idea of removing a wild honey badger from Earth, transporting it across light years to an alien world, and placing it in what amounted to a cosmic zoo made her deeply uncomfortable. But she also understood the political implications. The Crithians were one of the most powerful voices on the council. If they wanted a honey badger, they would get one, with or without human cooperation. Better to be involved in the process and ensure the animal was treated as humanely as possible. The formal request arrived exactly 7 days later. It was worded politely but firmly, requesting Earth's assistance in obtaining one adult male honey badger for cultural exchange and scientific study. The Crithians offered advanced medical technology in exchange, specifically a regenerative therapy that could repair nerve damage, something that would revolutionize treatment for millions of humans suffering from spinal injuries. Sarah knew the council had approved the request. Earth's government would have to agree. 2 months later, a specialized capture team stood in the Kalahari Desert, equipped with tranquilizers, reinforced containment units, and more backup personnel than seemed necessary for catching a single medium-sized animal. Dr. James Morrison, now serving as Sarah's deputy, led the operation. He had spent weeks studying honey badger behavior, consulting with wildlife experts and designing a capture protocol that would minimize stress to the animal. The team had identified a particular male, a large specimen that locals had nicknamed Razor for his tendency to tear through fences. The capture did not go according to plan. Razor evaded 3 tranquilizer darts, each of which should have been sufficient to sedate an animal twice his size. When a 4th dart finally hit, he remained conscious and active for another 20 minutes, using that time to attack the containment vehicle, bite through a reinforced tire, and injure 2 team members before finally collapsing. Even sedated, his body remained tense, muscles coiled as if ready to spring back into action at any moment. The transport to the Crethian vessel in orbit was handled with extreme caution. Razor was kept in a specialized containment unit designed for far more dangerous creatures, monitored constantly by both human and Crethian medical staff. He woke during the trip 3 times despite being on continuous sedation, each time requiring additional doses that would have been lethal to most Earth mammals. The Crethian medical officer, a being named Sixthar, made several notes in his report about the creature's abnormal resistance to chemical intervention. When they finally arrived at Nexus 7, Thexnar was waiting at the landing platform. He had arranged for a special habitat to be constructed, one that incorporated elements of Earth's various ecosystems where honey badgers were found. There were rocky outcrops, underground burrows, areas with vegetation, and even a small population of prey animals for Razor to hunt. The entire setup had cost more than the Crethians typically spent on preserving entire endangered species from lesser-developed worlds. Sarah had accompanied the transport. Unwilling to let Razor face this new environment without at least one familiar face present, though she doubted the animal would recognize or care about her presence. She stood with Thexnar as the containment unit was carefully positioned at the entrance to the habitat. Through the transparent panels they could see Razor pacing, his movements deliberate and purposeful. He was not frantically trying to escape like a panicked animal might. He was studying his prison, looking for weaknesses. "Tell me honestly, Director Chen," Thexnar said quietly. "Do you believe we have made a mistake bringing this creature here?" Sarah considered the question carefully. She looked at Razor, at the expensive habitat, at the dozens of Crethean staff members who would be responsible for managing this one small Earth animal. "I think," she said slowly, "that you are about to learn something very important about Earth and about humans. We did not become the dominant species on our planet because we were the strongest or the fastest. We became dominant because we learned to coexist with creatures like this, creatures that refuse to accept any limitations. We learned from them, and in some ways we became like them." She turned to face the ambassador directly. "You wanted to understand what makes Earth's hunters special. You are about to get a very thorough education." The containment unit door opened. Razor did not immediately bolt out as many animals would. He stepped out slowly, deliberately, his nose working as he processed the new scents. His eyes, small but intensely focused, swept across the habitat. Then he looked directly at Thexnar and Sarah, standing on the observation platform. For a long moment, predator and observers stared at each other. Then Razor turned and walked calmly into his new territory, moving with the confidence of a creature that had already decided this entire moon belonged to him. The real test was about to begin. The first week passed without incident, which itself made the observation team nervous. Razor had explored every centimeter of his habitat, marked territory, established a primary burrow, and begun hunting the introduced prey animals with methodical efficiency. The Crethean researchers noted his hunting patterns in their reports, commenting on his surprisingly strategic approach. Unlike many predators who relied on speed or ambush tactics, Razor seemed to evaluate each potential target, analyzing the energy cost versus nutritional benefit before committing to a hunt. Dr. Sixthar, who had been assigned as the primary researcher for the Honey Badger project, found himself genuinely impressed. He had initially dismissed the creature as overhyped, but watching Razor navigate the habitat changed his perspective. The animal demonstrated problem-solving abilities that were remarkable for a creature with such a small brain-to-body ratio. When a feeding mechanism malfunctioned, Razor spent less than an hour figuring out how to manually trigger it by manipulating the external panel with his claws. No one had taught him this. He simply observed, analyzed, and adapted. Sarah had returned to Earth after the first 3 days, satisfied that Razor was adjusting to his new environment. She maintained regular contact with the research team, receiving daily updates on the honey badger's activities. The reports were thorough and professional, but she detected an underlying current of growing concern in the researchers' word choices. They described Razor as increasingly exploratory and testing habitat boundaries, and demonstrating heightened interest in barrier integrity. To Sarah, who had spent months studying honey badger behavior, these were not concerning signs. They were predictable ones. Razor was doing exactly what honey badgers did. He was planning an escape. On day 9, Razor made his first serious attempt. The habitat walls were constructed from a polymer compound that could withstand attacks from creatures 10 times his size and strength. The Cretheans had tested it against everything from acid-spitting reptiles to animals with diamond-hard claws. Razor approached the southern wall, the section furthest from the observation stations, and began digging. He worked methodically, removing dirt from the base of the wall, searching for any gap or weakness he could exploit. The automated alert system triggered immediately, and security personnel rushed to the location. They found Razor 3 meters deep in a tunnel that angled sharply under the wall. He had been digging for what they estimated to be at least 6 hours straight, without rest, without stopping to eat or drink. When the security team approached, he did not flee back to his burrow. He turned to face them, his body language radiating challenge rather than fear. The team leader, a Crethean named Vexthar, had hunted dangerous game across 40 systems. He recognized a serious threat when he saw one. Regardless of the threat's size, they filled in the tunnel and reinforced the wall section with additional barriers, burying them deep enough that no digging attempt could reach them. Sixthar updated his report. noting that the subject had demonstrated unexpected engineering capability and remarkable endurance. He recommended increasing the habitat's environmental enrichment to reduce escape motivation. More complex hunting opportunities were introduced, puzzles that could occupy the honey badger's considerable problem-solving skills. For 3 days, Razor seemed to engage with these new elements. Then he resumed his escape attempts. The northern wall proved to have a microscopic flaw in its sealant, a gap barely 2 millimeters wide where 2 sections joined. Razor found it. He spent an entire night working at that gap, using his claws to widen it molecule by molecule. By morning, he had created an opening large enough to fit his head through. The automated repair systems detected the breach and sealed it before he could progress further, but the damage to the researcher's confidence was already done. How had he found such a tiny flaw? The same scanning equipment the Crithians used to detect structural weaknesses in starship hulls had missed that gap. Razor had found it through nothing but persistent, systematic investigation. Thexnar arrived at the facility on day 15, summoned by increasingly worried reports from his research team. He stood in the observation room, watching Razor through the monitoring screens. The honey badger was currently engaged in what appeared to be a structured testing routine, methodically checking each section of the habitat perimeter, probing for weaknesses. He does this for 4 hours every morning, Sixthar explained, and again for 3 hours each evening. The rest of his time is spent hunting, eating, and sleeping. But those 7 hours are dedicated entirely to escape planning. Have we considered simply expanding the habitat? Thexnar asked. Perhaps he needs more space. Sixthar's expression suggested he had considered and rejected this idea already. Commander, I do not believe space is the issue. This creature does not want a larger prison. He wants freedom. And more importantly, he appears to view our containment efforts as a challenge rather than an insurmountable barrier. Each time we stop one escape attempt, he seems to take it as useful data rather than a defeat. Thexnar thought about Sarah's words, about how humans had learned from creatures like this. He was beginning to understand what she meant. It was not about physical capability. It was about mindset. Razor did not conceptualize failure the way most intelligent beings did. To him, each failed escape was not evidence that escape was impossible. It was merely information about which methods did not work, bringing him one step closer to finding the method that would. That night, Razor made his most ambitious attempt yet. He had noticed that the automated feeding systems created a brief drop in the electromagnetic barrier's integrity during delivery cycles. The drop lasted exactly 1.3 seconds, far too brief for any creature to exploit under normal circumstances. But Razor had been timing these cycles for days, learning the exact rhythm. When the next delivery triggered, he was already in position. He moved with explosive speed, throwing himself at the barrier during that narrow window. He did not make it through. The timing was off by a fraction of a second, and the barrier's edge caught him, delivering a shock that would have killed most Earth animals his size. Razor tumbled backward, unconscious. The medical team rushed in immediately, fearing they had lost the specimen. Sixthar performed emergency treatment, stabilizing Razor's vital signs and monitoring his recovery. The honey badger regained consciousness after 40 minutes, far faster than should have been possible given the severity of the shock. His first action upon waking was not to retreat or show fear. He looked toward the barrier, and in Sixthar's professional opinion, he appeared to be calculating. The medical reading suggested significant pain, possibly internal injuries that would take days to heal. Razor did not seem to care about the injuries. He cared about the data he had just gathered regarding the barrier's timing and the consequences of failure. Contact Director Chen, Thexnar ordered. Tell her we need to discuss the honey badger situation. And contact the council. I believe we may have underestimated what this creature represents, not just as an individual animal, but as an example of Earth's evolutionary pressures. If a single specimen can cause this much difficulty, we need to understand what this means for our understanding of humanity itself. Sixthar prepared the communication, but he added a personal note to his own research log. Subject continues to demonstrate unprecedented determination and adaptive capability. Traditional containment paradigms may be insufficient. The creature appears to view captivity not as a permanent state, but as a temporary problem to be solved. Recommend fundamental reassessment of Earth's threat classification. If this is what their harmless wildlife can do, What are the humans themselves capable of when properly motivated? Razor, meanwhile, had returned to his burrow. He would rest, heal, and begin planning his next attempt. The barrier's timing was now stored in his memory. He just needed to be faster, and he would be. Because that was what honey badgers did. They adapted, they persisted, and they never stopped trying. The Crithians were about to learn a hard lesson. You cannot cage determination. You can only delay it. Sarah arrived at Nexus 7 3 days later, accompanied by Dr. Morrison and a small team of Earth's best animal behaviorists. The situation had escalated beyond anyone's initial expectations. Razor had made 4 more escape attempts since his electromagnetic shock, each one more sophisticated than the last. He had learned to manipulate the automated systems, trigger false alerts to study security response patterns, and had even figured out how to cause minor malfunctions in the monitoring equipment by urinating on specific junction points he had identified as vulnerable. He is winning, Thexner said bluntly when they met in his private office. The admission clearly cost him something, not in the sense that he has escaped, but in the sense that he has disrupted operations, consumed enormous resources, and demonstrated that our containment protocols are fundamentally flawed. We have creatures in other habitats that are 50 times his mass and 100 times more physically dangerous. None of them have caused 1/10 the problems this animal has created. Sarah nodded slowly, looking at the compiled reports on her tablet. The cost analysis was staggering. The Crithians had spent more maintaining Razor's containment in 3 weeks than they typically spent on entire facility operations for a year. Equipment had been damaged, personnel had requested reassignment, and the facility's director had submitted a formal complaint to the council about the unreasonable resource drain. "What do you want from us, Ambassador?" she asked. "Permission to return him to Earth?" "No," Thexnar said, and something in his tone made Sarah look up sharply. "I want to understand. My people have been hunters for 3,000 years. We have studied predators across hundreds of worlds. We thought we understood what made an apex predator effective. But this creature has challenged every assumption we held. He is not stronger, not faster, not more intelligent than other predators we have observed. Yet he is more dangerous in a fundamental way we cannot quantify. I need you to explain how Earth produced something like this." Sarah gestured to Dr. Morrison, who pulled up a presentation they had prepared during the journey. "Earth is what we call a death world," Morrison began, "but not in the way most council species understand that term. We do not have the largest predators or the most extreme environmental conditions. What we have is incredible biodiversity and constant evolutionary pressure. Creatures like the honey badger did not evolve in isolation. They evolved in an environment where everything was trying to kill or eat them." The hologram showed Earth's African continent, specifically the regions where honey badgers were most common. Razor's ancestors survived by developing a strategy that seems counterintuitive, Morrison continued. Instead of becoming larger or faster or developing better camouflage, they became fearless. They developed the ability to fight things they absolutely should not fight, and to survive things that absolutely should kill them. This is not stupidity. This is a precisely calibrated survival strategy that has worked for millions of years. Thexnar studied the data carefully. "You are saying that fearlessness itself is an evolutionary advantage?" Morrison nodded. "In certain contexts, yes. Predators rely on cost-benefit analysis. Is this prey worth the injury I might sustain? Honey badgers eliminated that calculation by making the cost always seem too high. If you attack a honey badger, you will win eventually because you are bigger and stronger. But you will be injured in the process, badly, and in the wild, injuries mean death. So predators learn to leave honey badgers alone." Sarah took over the presentation. "But there is something else you need to understand, Ambassador. Humanity evolved alongside creatures like this. We watched them. We learned from them. The same fearlessness, the same refusal to accept defeat, the same willingness to fight against impossible odds. These traits became part of our own evolutionary psychology. We call it determination, stubbornness, human spirit. But it is the same principle. When you study Razor, you are not just studying one animal. You are studying the environment that shaped humanity itself." The room fell silent. Thexnar's 4 eyes moved between the humans and the data displays. He was a military strategist as well as a hunter, and he was beginning to see the implications. "You are telling me that humanity as a species carries these same psychological traits?" Sarah smiled, but there was no humor in it. Why do you think we made it to space, Ambassador? We are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the smartest. We do not have natural armor or weapons or any of the advantages so many other species possess. But we do not stop. We do not quit. We see a problem and we work at it until it breaks. Just like Razor works at that wall. A priority alert interrupted the conversation. Security had detected another escape attempt. But this one was different. Razor was not attacking the walls or barriers. He had somehow accessed the habitat's life support systems and was systematically destroying the oxygen regulators. Not all of them, just enough to trigger emergency protocols that would require maintenance personnel to enter the habitat. He was not trying to escape through the walls anymore. He was trying to create a situation where the walls would have to be opened. Brilliant, Morrison whispered, staring at the security feed. He is learning our systems faster than we expected. He has figured out that he cannot break out, so he is engineering a scenario where we have to let him out. Thexanar was already moving toward the control center, the humans following close behind.
How long until life support becomes critical?
He demanded. The duty officer checked her displays. Approximately 2 hours, Commander. After that, we will need to send in a repair team or risk losing the specimen. Can we repair it remotely? Sarah asked. The officer shook her head. The damage is too extensive. He has physically torn apart components. We need hands-on repairs. Thexanar turned to his security chief, Vexeral. Can your team enter the habitat and conduct repairs while containing the subject? Vexeral looked at his personnel roster, then at the live feed showing Razor calmly sitting near the damaged equipment, watching the cameras as if he knew exactly what kind of crisis he had created. Yes, Commander. But I will need authorization to use lethal force if necessary. No, Sarah said immediately. Every eye in the control center turned to her. That animal is worth more than you realize, not just as a specimen, but as a symbol of Earth Council relations. If you kill him because he was too effective at being what he is, you will create a diplomatic incident that will take decades to resolve. Thexnar's mandibles clicked in frustration.
Then what do you suggest, Director Chen?
We cannot let him destroy his own life support, and we cannot risk my personnel's safety by sending them in unprepared. Sarah looked at Morrison, at their team of behaviorists, and then at the security feed showing Razor. An idea was forming. Dangerous and probably insane, but possibly the only solution that would work. Let me go in, she said quietly. Alone, no weapons, no armor. Just me and a toolkit to fix the damage. He has seen me before. I was present when he was captured and when he arrived here. I am not a threat in his assessment. And more importantly, I understand what he wants. I can negotiate. The control center erupted in objections. Thexnar raised his hand for silence, his eyes fixed on Sarah. You understand that this creature has injured trained security personnel? That it does not recognize surrender or retreat as concepts? Sarah nodded. I understand perfectly, Ambassador. That is exactly why I need to be the one to go in. Because I am not going to try to dominate him or contain him. I am going to talk to him. And if I am right about his intelligence level, he will understand that I am offering him something better than escape. What could possibly be better than freedom? Vexeral demanded. Sarah smiled. Respect. Recognition that he is not a prisoner or a specimen, but an ambassador in his own right. And a partnership that benefits both our species. She turned to Thexnar.
Give me 1 hour with him.
If I fail, you can implement whatever containment protocol you think is necessary. But if I succeed, you will have learned more about Earth and humanity than 1,000 research papers could teach you. Thexnar considered this for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. 1 hour. But we will be monitoring constantly, and at the first sign of genuine danger, we will intervene. Sarah accepted these terms. She spent the next 20 minutes preparing, listening to the behaviorist's advice, studying Razor's recent patterns, and mentally preparing herself for what might be the most important conversation of her diplomatic career, even if it was with a creature who could not understand her words but just might understand her intent. As she stood at the habitat entrance, watching the door cycle open, Morrison gripped her shoulder. Are you absolutely sure about this? He asked quietly. Sarah took a deep breath. No, she admitted. But that is very human of me, is it not? Doing something terrifying because it might work? She stepped through the entrance before he could respond, and the door sealed behind her. Somewhere in the habitat, Razor stopped what he was doing and turned his attention to this new development. The real test was about to begin. The first thing Sarah noticed was the smell. Earth smells, familiar and comforting despite the artificial nature of the habitat. Dry grass, warm stone, the musky scent of animal occupation. Her eyes adjusted to the slightly dimmer lighting, calibrated to match the African savanna's natural conditions. She could see the damaged life support equipment about 30 meters away, components scattered in a pattern that suggested methodical destruction rather than random vandalism. And near those components, watching her with absolute stillness, was Razor. She did not move toward him immediately. Instead, she sat down right there, just inside the entrance, making herself smaller and less threatening. The toolkit rested beside her, clearly visible. She had removed anything that could be construed as a weapon, leaving only the basic repair tools necessary to fix the oxygen regulators. In the control center, she knew, dozens of beings were watching every movement, analyzing every detail. But right now, that did not matter. Right now, there were only two creatures in this space, both far from home, both trying to survive in an alien environment. Razor had not moved. His posture was alert but not aggressive, his body language that of a creature assessing a situation rather than preparing for combat. Sarah had spent enough time studying the footage to recognize the difference. When Razor was about to attack, his shoulders tensed in a specific way, his head lowered slightly. Right now, he was simply watching. Good. That meant she had a chance. She began to speak, not because she thought he would understand the words, but because tone and rhythm mattered. "I know you want to go home," she said softly, keeping her voice steady and calm. "I understand that feeling. I am very far from home too, but I cannot take you back to Earth, Razor, and you cannot fight your way out of this place. You are smart enough to know that by now. You have tested every option, tried every strategy. They are not going to let you leave." Razor's ears twitched slightly. He was listening, processing. Sarah continued, "But maybe we can find a different solution. Maybe instead of being a prisoner here, you could be something else. A teacher. A partner. Someone who helps others understand what Earth creatures are capable of." She slowly reached for the toolkit, moving with deliberate care. "I am going to fix the equipment you damaged. Not because I want to trap you, but because I do not want you to suffocate. I assume you do not want that either, or you would not have left yourself 2 hours of air." She stood up gradually, giving him plenty of time to react if he was going to. He remained still, watching. Sarah began walking toward the damaged equipment, angling her path so she was approaching from the side rather than directly toward him. This was less confrontational, giving him space to retreat if he wanted to. She kept talking as she moved. "The beings who brought you here are learning from you. Every escape attempt, every clever solution you find, teaches them something new about Earth, about determination, about refusing to accept limitations." When she reached the equipment, she was less than 5 meters from Razor, close enough that if he decided to attack, she would have no chance to defend herself. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, but she forced her hands to remain steady as she knelt down and began examining the damage. He had been thorough, tearing apart connections that would take considerable time to repair. She started with the most critical components, her fingers working quickly but carefully. Razor moved. Sarah's entire body tensed, but she forced herself not to react, not to look at him directly. Through her peripheral vision, she saw him stand and walk closer, not charging, just approaching with casual confidence. He stopped about 2 meters away, close enough to reach her in one leap if he wanted to. Then he sat down, not in an attack posture, just sitting, watching her work with what seemed like genuine curiosity. "Thank you for not eating me," Sarah said, unable to stop herself from making the comment despite the tension. A small laugh escaped her lips, driven by nervous energy and relief. She continued repairing the equipment, narrating what she was doing in that same calm tone. "This connector routes oxygen from the primary generator. You pulled it completely out of its housing. Smart target selection, maximum disruption with minimal effort. Time passed, 10 minutes. 20. Sarah worked methodically through the repairs while Razor watched. Occasionally, he would shift position slightly, moving to get a better view of what she was doing. At one point, he sniffed at her toolkit, investigating the unfamiliar objects. She let him, not interfering, treating him like the intelligent being he was rather than a dangerous animal to be controlled. "You are probably wondering why I am not afraid of you," she said as she reconnected a crucial circuit. Truth is, I am terrified, but I am also fascinated. You represent something important, Razor. You represent the spirit of never giving up. That is something humans understand very deeply. The equipment hummed back to life, air circulation resuming with a soft whoosh. Sarah sat back, wiping her hands on her pants. There, fixed. You could break it again if you wanted to. I could not stop you. But I am hoping you will not, because I am hoping you will accept what I am about to offer you. She finally looked directly at him, meeting his eyes for the first time since entering the habitat. I am going to recommend that they change how they treat you, not as a specimen or a prisoner, but as a consultant. They want to learn from you? Fine. But it has to be on terms that respect what you are. She had no idea if he could understand any of this, but she pressed on anyway. That means a larger territory. Real challenges, not artificial puzzles. Access to environments that change and adapt, that require genuine problem solving. And most importantly, acknowledgement that you are here as Earth's representative, not as their property. You will not be free in the way you were on Earth, but you will have purpose. And purpose, Razor, is sometimes more valuable than freedom. Razor stood up. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This was the moment when she would find out if her gamble had worked, or if she had just wasted an hour talking to an animal who was about to tear her apart. He walked toward her, closing the distance to less than a meter. She could see the scars on his hide, evidence of countless battles and encounters. Up close, he was even more impressive than she had realized. Compact and powerful, every inch of him designed for survival. He sniffed her hand, the one that had been working on the equipment. Then he turned and walked away, heading toward his primary burrow. Not running, not attacking, just leaving. Sarah let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. In the control center, she imagined, everyone was trying to figure out what had just happened. She was trying to figure that out herself. I will take that as a maybe, she said to his retreating form. She stood up slowly, collected her toolkit, and walked back toward the entrance. Her legs felt shaky, adrenaline and relief mixing in her system. The door opened and she stepped through into the staging area where Morrison and half the facility staff were waiting. Well, Morrison asked. Did it work? Sarah thought about how to answer that. He did not kill me, so that is a positive sign. He also did not break the equipment again after I repaired it, which suggests he was willing to hear me out. But I cannot tell you what he decided. We will have to wait and see what he does next. She turned to Thexnar, who had descended from the control center to meet her. Ambassador, I need to make a formal proposal regarding Razor's status and treatment. I think we have been approaching the situation entirely wrong. He is not something to be contained. He is someone to be negotiated with. Thexnar's four eyes studied her carefully. You believe the creature is sapient? Sarah shook her head. Not in the way we usually define sapience. He cannot build technology or communicate with complex language. But he has agency, intelligence, and decision-making capabilities that deserve respect. If you continue to treat him as a prisoner, he will continue to be a problem. But if you treat him as a colleague, even a very unusual one, I think you will get very different results. Over the next 3 days, the facility staff watched Razor's behavior closely. He did not attempt any more escapes. He resumed his normal hunting and territorial patterns, but with a noticeable change. He stopped testing the barriers. He stopped destroying equipment. It was as if he had reached some kind of internal decision and was now waiting to see if the situation would change. Sarah spent those days drafting a comprehensive proposal for the council, outlining a new classification system for creatures that demonstrated high levels of problem-solving ability and determination. On the 4th day, Thexnar summoned Sarah to his office. The council has reviewed your proposal, he said without preamble. They are willing to implement it on a trial basis using Razor as the test case. He will be transferred to a new facility, one designed not as a containment habitat but as an environmental research station. He will have access to 10 times the territory, variable terrain, and actual challenges to solve. In exchange, we will study how he approaches these challenges and use that data to better understand Earth-type evolutionary psychology. Sarah felt a wave of relief. And his status? Thexnar's mandibles formed what might have been a smile. He will be designated as Earth's first non-sapient ambassador. Technically, that makes him a diplomatic entity under council law, which means he has certain protections and rights that specimens do not. Your human government has already approved this arrangement. Apparently, they find the political implications quite valuable. When does the transfer happen? Sarah asked.
2 weeks.
We need time to prepare the new facility. You will accompany him, of course.
And Director Chen?
She looked up at him. You were right about what this creature represents. We have been studying predators for millennia, but we were always looking at physical capabilities. We forgot to consider psychological ones. Razor has taught us that determination itself can be a form of power. That is a lesson worth far more than any technology we might have traded for his capture. Sarah returned to Razor's habitat one last time before leaving Nexus 7. She stood at the observation window, watching him bask in the artificial sunlight. He looked up at her, and for a moment she could have sworn he recognized her. You won, she said softly. Maybe not in the way you intended, but you made them understand that you cannot be treated as just another animal. That is more than most humans have accomplished in their dealings with the Council. Well done, Razor. Well done. 6 months later, the Razor Project had become the most watched research initiative in the entire Galactic Council network. The new facility on Nexus 7 had been expanded twice to accommodate growing interest from xenobiologists, military strategists, and behavioral scientists from 40 different species. What had started as a simple study of one Earth creature had evolved into something much more significant, a fundamental reassessment of how the galaxy understood intelligence, capability, and evolutionary success. The facility itself was remarkable. Rather than a contained habitat, it was 100 square kilometers of diverse terrain, from rocky highlands to dense artificial forests, wetlands, and open grasslands. Environmental controls could shift conditions to simulate different Earth ecosystems, presenting Razor with constantly changing challenges. Hidden throughout the territory were research stations where scientists could observe without interfering, cameras that tracked his movements, and automated systems that presented problems requiring novel solutions. Razor had thrived. Within the first month, he had explored every centimeter of his new territory, established multiple burrow systems, and begun hunting the introduced prey populations with devastating efficiency. But the real revelation came when the research team started presenting him with artificial challenges. They would hide food in locked containers, create obstacles that required tool use to overcome, or introduce environmental hazards that demanded creative problem-solving. Razor approached each challenge with the same relentless determination he had shown in his escape attempts, and his success rate was extraordinary. Dr. Sixthar, now the project's lead researcher, had published 3 papers on Razor's cognitive abilities, each one challenging long-held assumptions about the relationship between brain size and intelligence. What we are observing, he explained to a gathering of council scientists, is a form of intelligence that does not rely on complex abstract reasoning or language. Instead, it is purely practical intelligence, focused entirely on solving immediate physical problems. But within that domain, the subject demonstrates capabilities that rival or exceed species with far larger brains. The military implications had not gone unnoticed. Thexanar had arranged for several council defense analysts to observe Razor's behavior, particularly his approach to overcoming obstacles and his complete lack of fear response to threats. One analyst, a Vexorian named Crixtal, had written a classified report that sent ripples through military planning circles. The core conclusion was simple but profound. If Earth's wildlife included creatures with this level of determination and problem-solving ability, humanity itself likely possessed these traits in even more developed forms. Any military planning that assumed humans would surrender or retreat when faced with overwhelming odds was fundamentally flawed. Sarah had become something of a celebrity in diplomatic circles. Her negotiation with Razor had been analyzed, taught in xenodiplomacy courses, and referenced in countless discussions about human psychology. She found the attention somewhat ridiculous, given that she had essentially just talked to an animal who probably understood none of her words. But the symbolism was powerful. She had demonstrated that humans could find common ground even with creatures that seemed fundamentally alien and hostile. If they could do that with a honey badger, what could they do with actual alien species? The real breakthrough came when Razor encountered the Vexorian observation team. 3 Vexorian researchers had been granted access to establish a ground-level monitoring station in Razor's territory, something that required them to spend several days in the field with only basic protective equipment. They had been assured that Razor was not aggressive toward beings who did not threaten him, but everyone was nervous. The Vexorians were apex predators on their own world, large and intimidating with natural weapons that could tear through most organic materials. How would Razor react to their presence? The answer was not what anyone expected. Razor approached their camp on the second day, moving with his characteristic confident gait. The Vexorians froze, unsure whether to retreat or stand their ground. Razor walked right past them, completely ignoring their presence, and proceeded to raid their food storage. He ate what he wanted, marked the territory around their camp as his own, and then left. The message was clear. He acknowledged their existence but considered them irrelevant to his interests. They were neither threats nor prey. They were simply there, and he was willing to coexist as long as they did not interfere with his activities. One of the Vexorian researchers, a female named Sixrel, was fascinated by this interaction. She began leaving small offerings of food near her station, not trying to tame or domesticate Razor, but simply establishing what she thought of as a trading relationship. To her amazement, Razor began reciprocating. He would occasionally leave prey remains near her station, portions he could not eat, as if sharing resources. It was not affection or bonding in any traditional sense, but it was a form of communication, a mutual acknowledgement of coexistence. This behavior sparked an entirely new line of research. Could honey badgers, despite their reputation for aggression and fearlessness, actually form cooperative relationships with other species under the right circumstances? Field studies on Earth suggested they were solitary and territorial, but perhaps that was because Earth's environment required that survival strategy. In a resource-rich environment where territory was not scarce, maybe they could adapt to more cooperative behaviors. Razor seemed to be proving that possibility. The Council's xenopsychology department took particular interest in this development. They sent Dr. Velmara, one of their most respected researchers, to study the phenomenon. She spent 3 months at the facility, observing Razor's interactions with various species, documenting what she called practical cooperation protocols. Her conclusion challenged another fundamental assumption, that highly aggressive, fearless creatures could not engage in cooperative behavior. Razor was both fiercely independent and willing to coexist, even trade with others when it benefited him. The two traits were not mutually exclusive. Back on Earth, Razor's fame had reached unexpected heights. He had become an internet sensation, with millions of humans following updates about his activities on Nexus 7. Documentaries had been produced, merchandise had been created, and several universities had established honey badger studies programs, examining the creature's role in human cultural development. There was even a political movement that used Razor as a symbol, arguing that humanity should adopt more of his fearless, relentless approach to dealing with the older galactic civilizations. Sarah found this both amusing and slightly concerning. "We need to be careful," she told Morrison during one of their regular conference calls. "Razor is becoming a symbol of human exceptionalism, which could backfire diplomatically. Yes, he represents determination and fearlessness, but we do not want other species to think we are using him to threaten them or make aggressive statements about human capabilities." Morrison agreed, but he also pointed out the positive aspects. "People are proud, Sarah. For the first time since making contact with the Council, humans feel like we have something unique to contribute, something that is not just catching up to everyone else's technology. Razor has given people confidence. That confidence was about to be tested in an unexpected way. The Crithian Empire, dealing with a territorial dispute on one of their frontier worlds, was facing a seemingly impossible problem. A native species, a burrowing creature that could collapse tunnel systems and underground installations, had made a key mining region completely unusable. Traditional containment and removal methods had failed. The creatures were too adaptable, too persistent, too willing to keep returning no matter how many times they were driven away. Every solution the Crithians had attempted had been defeated by the creature's refusal to accept defeat. Thexnar saw the parallel immediately. He contacted Sarah with a proposal that was both audacious and somewhat desperate. "We need to understand how to deal with creatures that refuse to be discouraged. Everything in our military and ecological management training assumes that sufficient deterrence will eventually work. But what do you do when deterrence fails? When the target simply does not care about costs or consequences? Your honey badger has forced us to confront this question. Now we need practical answers." Sarah assembled a team of experts who had been studying Razor's behavior. Together, they developed a new approach to the Crithian frontier problem, one based on principles observed in Razor's interactions with the research staff. Instead of trying to eliminate or contain the burrowing creatures, they would establish boundaries that offered alternative resources, create environments where the creatures' natural behaviors could be satisfied without interfering with mining operations. Essentially, give them something better to do than destroy the installations. It took 4 months to implement the strategy, but it worked. The burrowing creatures gradually shifted their focus to the new resource zones, which had been designed to be more attractive and easier to access than the mining infrastructure. Attacks on the installations dropped by 90%. The Crithians were forced to acknowledge that sometimes the solution to an unstoppable creature was not to stop it, but to redirect it. The lesson had come directly from watching how Razor had been managed at the research facility. The success of this application brought Razor's status to new heights. He was no longer just an interesting specimen or a diplomatic curiosity. He was a teacher whose lessons had practical value across multiple fields. The Council officially upgraded his classification to Galactic Resource of Scientific Significance, which came with substantial funding for his care and research. Earth received a significant portion of these funds, along with formal recognition as a contributor of valuable ecological knowledge. Thexnar visited the facility one more time, 8 months after Razor's transfer to the larger territory. He stood at one of the observation points, watching the honey badger investigate a new challenge that had been set up that morning. "I underestimated him," Thexnar admitted to Sarah, who stood beside him. "More importantly, I underestimated what his existence implied about Earth and humanity. I assumed physical prowess was the primary measure of a species' capability. I was wrong. Psychological traits matter just as much, perhaps more." Sarah nodded. "We have a long way to go before we are equals with the older civilizations in terms of technology and resources. But we bring something valuable to the Council. We bring perspective from a death world that favored mental toughness over physical advantages. We bring experience coexisting with creatures like Razor, learning from them rather than just dominating them. And we bring a refusal to accept that anything is truly impossible until we have exhausted every possible approach." She smiled. "Razor is teaching the galaxy that lesson, and maybe, just maybe, humanity will do the same." 2 years after Razor's arrival at Nexus 7, the Galactic Council convened an extraordinary session. The agenda included only one item: the formal establishment of Earth as a full-member civilization with voting rights and access to all Council technologies. The decision had been controversial, with several older species arguing that humanity had not yet demonstrated sufficient technological advancement to warrant such status. But the arguments in favor had ultimately proven more compelling, and almost all of those arguments traced back, directly or indirectly, to one small creature from Africa. Sarah sat in the human delegation's upgraded seating area, no longer tucked away in a corner, but positioned among the established powers. The chamber was as impressive as she remembered from that first visit, but now it felt different. Less intimidating, more like a place where humanity belonged. Beside her sat Dr. Morrison, Ambassador Chen from the Earth Unified Government, and 3 other senior diplomats. Behind them, visible on a live holographic feed, were millions of humans watching from Earth, celebrating what many were calling the most important moment in human history since the first moon landing. The vote was called. One by one, species representatives indicated their position. The Crithian Empire, unsurprisingly given Thexnar's transformation from skeptic to advocate, voted in favor. The Vexorian Alliance, whose researchers had developed such fascination with Razor's behavior, voted in favor. Species after species followed suit, until the final tally showed overwhelming support. Earth was officially a full member of the Galactic Council. The chamber erupted in the various forms of applause and celebration practiced by different species, a cacophony of sounds that somehow felt harmonious. After the ceremony, after the formal speeches and congratulations, Sarah found herself alone on an observation deck overlooking Nexus 7's surface. She could see the research facility in the distance, a cluster of structures that had grown substantially over the past 2 years. Somewhere in that 100-kilometer territory, Razor was doing what he always did: investigating, hunting, surviving. He had no idea that his existence had fundamentally altered humanity's place in the galaxy. He probably would not have cared if he did know. He was a honey badger, after all. His concerns were more immediate and practical. Thexnar joined her at the railing. They stood in companionable silence for a moment before he spoke. "You know, when I first saw your presentation about the honey badger, I thought you were desperate, trying to make your species seem more impressive by association with a small predator. I believed you were grasping at straws because you had nothing truly remarkable to offer." He paused, his four eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I have never been more wrong about anything in my entire career," Sarah smiled. "Razor did not change anything about Earth or humanity, Ambassador. He simply revealed what was already there. We evolved on a planet that required mental toughness to survive. Every human carries a bit of honey badger psychology in them. The refusal to quit. The determination to find another way when the first 100 ways fail. The willingness to face things that should terrify us because the alternative is giving up. Razor just made it visible in a way that other species could understand. And that is precisely why humanity's full membership was inevitable," Thexnar replied. "The Council needs species that approach problems differently. For too long, we have relied on technological solutions to every challenge, but some problems cannot be solved with better technology. They require persistence, creativity, and yes, a certain fearlessness. Your species has proven you possess these qualities." Razor was merely the evidence that convinced the skeptics. Over the following months, humanity began integrating more fully into galactic society. Technology transfers began, starting with medical advances and gradually expanding to more sophisticated systems. Earth scientists worked alongside alien researchers, contributing unique perspectives that often surprised their colleagues. The collaborative research on Death World ecology, led by human experts, became one of the most cited studies in Council history. Humanity was no longer trying to catch up to the older civilizations. They were contributing as equals. The Razor Project continued to expand. His territory was increased again, now covering nearly 300 square kilometers of diverse environments. Other Earth creatures had been brought to Nexus 7, creating a functional ecosystem that allowed researchers to study interaction patterns between species that had evolved under similar pressures. A wolverine, another small but ferociously determined predator, became Razor's nearest neighbor. Observations of their territorial disputes and eventual establishment of boundary protocols provided valuable data on conflict resolution between highly aggressive species. Dr. Sixthar had become one of the galaxy's foremost experts on Earth-type evolutionary psychology. His research had spawned an entire new field of study: persistence-based adaptation theory. The core principle was simple but revolutionary. In certain environments, psychological traits like determination and fearlessness could be more adaptive than physical advantages like size or strength. This challenged millennia of evolutionary theory that had focused primarily on physical characteristics. Universities across the Council were establishing departments dedicated to this new field, and human researchers were in high demand as professors and consultants. The military applications of Razor's lessons had also proven significant. Council defense forces had reformed their training programs, incorporating scenarios where numerical and technological superiority were not enough to guarantee victory. They studied historical human military campaigns, looking at situations where smaller, less equipped forces had defeated larger ones through sheer determination and refusal to surrender. The Battle of Thermopylae, the Winter War, the Siege of Leningrad, all became case studies in what military strategists now called honey badger doctrine. Sarah visited Razor regularly, even as her diplomatic responsibilities increased. She found something grounding about watching him go about his daily routines, completely unconcerned with his galactic fame. He had gained weight over the 2 years, thriving in the resource-rich environment, but he had not lost any of his characteristic intensity. Every challenge presented to him was attacked with the same relentless focus that had defined his escape attempts in the original habitat. During one visit, she witnessed something that perfectly encapsulated why Razor had become so important to human galactic relations. A new research team had arrived, including several members from a species that specialized in predictive behavior modeling. They had created a complex puzzle box containing food, with multiple locks and mechanisms that theoretically required specific solutions in a particular order. According to their models, even highly intelligent creatures would need at least 2 hours to solve it, if they could solve it at all. Razor approached the box with his usual confidence. He investigated it thoroughly, testing each mechanism, understanding how the components related to each other. Then, instead of following the designed solution path, he simply attacked the box's weakest point, a junction where two panels met. He worked at that spot with his claws for 20 minutes, systematically dismantling the entire side of the box. Within half an hour, he had bypassed all the locks and was eating the food inside. The puzzle designers stood in stunned silence. Their perfectly crafted challenge had been defeated by a creature who simply refused to play by the rules they had established. "That is the lesson," Sarah said to the lead researcher, who looked devastated by his puzzle's failure. "You created a challenge based on how you thought the problem should be solved. Razor does not care about should. He cares about what works. That is the difference between academic intelligence and practical intelligence, and that is why humanity has something valuable to offer the Council. We have spent our entire history solving problems in ways they should not be solved, finding paths that should not exist, surviving situations that should be impossible. Just like Razor." The researcher, a being named Tixmore from a species known for mathematical brilliance, stared at the destroyed puzzle box. Then slowly, he began to make a sound that his translator rendered as laughter. "I see now why your species was granted full membership. You are right. I was so focused on the elegant solution that I forgot the fundamental rule. There is no elegance in hunger. There is only success or failure. Your Razor understands this better than I do, despite my 3 advanced degrees in behavioral mathematics." As Earth's first decade as a full Council member progressed, humanity's influence continued to grow. Human diplomats, soldiers, scientists, and traders spread throughout Council space, bringing their unique perspective to countless situations. They were not always successful, and they made plenty of mistakes, but they approached challenges with a determination that other species found both admirable and slightly unnerving. The phrase human persistence had entered galactic common language, usually said with a mixture of respect and exasperation. Razor himself had aged, as all living things must. At 5 years old, he was entering the later stages of his life, though he showed no signs of slowing down. The research team had begun discussing what would happen when he eventually passed away. There was talk of preserving his genetic material, perhaps even bringing another honey badger to continue the research. But everyone agreed that Razor was unique, not because of his species, but because of his individual personality. He had been the right animal at the right time, appearing exactly when the galaxy needed to learn the lessons he represented. Sarah received a message one evening from Thexnar, now serving as the Council's chief of xenobiological affairs. He wanted her to know that the Council had approved a memorial project. When Razor eventually died, a monument would be erected on Nexus 7, not just to honor one animal, but to represent Earth's contribution to galactic civilization. The inscription would read, in multiple languages, "Here lived Razor, son of Earth, who taught the galaxy that size matters less than spirit, that power comes not from strength alone but from refusing to accept defeat, and that sometimes the smallest creatures carry the biggest lessons." She shared the news with Morrison that night during their regular call. He was quiet for a moment before speaking. "Do you think Razor knows what he accomplished? What he represents?" Sarah looked at the live feed from his habitat, watching him settle into his burrow for the night, completely content and utterly unaware of monuments and memorials and galactic significance. "No," she said softly, "and that is exactly as it should be. Razor is not a symbol or a representative or a teacher. He is just himself, being exactly what evolution made him. That is the real lesson here. We do not need to try to be something we are not. We just need to be authentically human, with all our determination and stubbornness and refusal to quit. The galaxy does not need us to become like the older species. It needs us to be exactly what we are, just like Razor." The feed showed Razor's burrow, peaceful and quiet. Above ground, the artificial stars of Nexus 7's night cycle twinkled in patterns that would never be seen from Earth. But below ground, in a den built by instinct and determination, a small creature from Africa rested. He had crossed the stars without knowing it, had changed galactic history without intending to, and had become the most unlikely ambassador humanity could have asked for. Tomorrow he would wake and hunt and investigate and persist, because that was what honey badgers did. And somewhere, Watching from a million different worlds, people from 1,000 different species would observe and learn and remember that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear make your decisions. Earth had finally found its place among the stars, and they had gotten there by being exactly what they had always been. Survivors, strivers, creatures who looked at impossible odds and decided to try anyway. Just like a honey badger staring down a lion, humans had faced the vast, ancient civilizations of the galaxy and said, simply and firmly, "We belong here too." And against all expectations, the galaxy had agreed. The scoffing had stopped. The respect had begun. And it all started with one fearless creature who never knew he was changing the universe, one determined action at a time.